Hey everyone, these books have shaped society, sparked revolutions, and transformed the way millions think around the world. So for today's video, I'm counting down the top 15 most influential books of all time. Starting with number 15, The First Folio by William Shakespeare. So when it comes to influential works in the English language, it would be hard to have any kind of list without this guy. And if it wasn't for this publication, we may never have even heard of him. Often considered the greatest writer in the English language and the greatest dramatist in all of history, Shakespeare's characters, stories, and language have taken hold of readers for hundreds of years and have greatly contributed to shaping our culture. William Shakespeare's comedies, histories, and tragedies, commonly referred to by modern scholars as the First Folio, is a collection of his plays published in 1623, about 7 years after Shakespeare's death, and it's considered one of the most influential books ever published. Printed in folio format and containing 36 of Shakespeare's plays, it was prepared by Shakespeare's colleague John Herminges and Henry Condell, and was dedicated to, quote, the incomparable pair of brethren, William Herbert, 3rd Earl of Pembroke, and his brother Philip Herbert, Earl of Montgomery. Although 19 of Shakespeare's plays had been published in quarto before 1623, the First Folio is arguably the only reliable text for about 20 of the plays, and a valuable source text for many of those previously published. 18 of the plays in the First Folio, including The Tempest, Twelfth Night, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, and Measure for Measure, among others, are not known to have been previously printed. Of perhaps 750 copies printed, 235 of them are known to remain, most of which are kept in either the public archives or private collections. More than 1/3 of the copies are housed at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., which is home to a total of 82 First Folios. Number 14, The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. One of the first great works of satire that's inspired countless works of comedy ever since, The Canterbury Tales has more than passed the test of time. It's a collection of 24 stories that runs over 17,000 lines written in Middle English by Geoffrey Chaucer between 1387 and 1400, and is widely regarded as Chaucer's magnum opus. These tales are presented as part of a storytelling contest by a group of pilgrims as they travel together from London to Canterbury to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury Cathedral. It has been suggested that the greatest contribution of the Canterbury Tales to English literature was the popularization of the English vernacular in mainstream literature as opposed to French, Italian, or Latin. English had, however, been used as a literary language centuries before Chaucer's time, and several of Chaucer's contemporaries, John Gower, William Langland, the Pearl Poet, and Julian of Norwich, also wrote major literary works in English. In the general prologue, some 30 pilgrims are introduced. Now, according to the prologue, Chaucer's intention was to write 4 stories from the perspective of each pilgrim, 2 each on the way to and from their ultimate destination. The question of whether the Canterbury Tales is a finished work, however, has not really been answered to date. There are 84 manuscripts and 4 editions of the work. 55 of these manuscripts are thought to have been originally complete, while 28 are so fragmentary that it's difficult to ascertain whether they were copied individually or part of a set. The tales vary in both minor and major ways from manuscript to manuscript. Many of the minor variations are due to copyist errors, while it's suggested that in other cases Chaucer both added to his work and revised it as it was being copied, and possibly as it was being distributed. Even the oldest surviving manuscripts of the tales are not Chaucer's originals. The very oldest is probably MS Peniar 392D, written by a scribe shortly after Chaucer's death. The first version of the Canterbury Tales to be published in print, however, was in 1476 by William Caxton, the first person in England to print books using a printing press. Only 10 copies of this edition are known to exist. Number 13, 1984 by George Orwell. The phrase dystopian fiction could have almost been invented for this novel, and terrifyingly, many ideas from the pages of this book have encroached into our own reality. 1984 is a dystopian novel and a cautionary tale by English writer George Orwell, published in 1949, as Orwell's 9th and final book completed in his lifetime. Thematically, it centers on the consequences of totalitarianism, mass surveillance, and repressive regimentation of people and behaviors within society. Orwell, a democratic socialist, modeled the authoritarian state in the novel on the Soviet Union in the era of Stalinism and Nazi Germany. But more broadly, the novel examines the role of truth and facts within society and the ways in which they can be manipulated. The story takes place in an imagined future in an unspecified year believed to be 1984, when much of the world is in perpetual war. Great Britain, now known as Airstrip 1, has become a province of the totalitarian superstate Oceania, which is led by Big Brother, a dictatorial leader supported by an intense cult of personality manufactured by the party's thought police. The party engages in omnipresent government surveillance and, through the Ministry of Truth, historical negationism and constant propaganda to persecute individuality and independent thinking. The protagonist, Winston Smith, is a diligent mid-level worker at the Ministry of Truth who secretly hates the party and dreams of rebellion. Smith keeps a forbidden diary. He begins a relationship with a colleague, Julia, and they learn about a shadowy resistance group called the Brotherhood. However, their contact in the Brotherhood turns out to be a party agent, and Smith and Julia are arrested. 1984 has become a classic literary example of political and dystopian fiction. It also popularized the term Orwellian as an adjective, with many terms used in the novel entering common usage, including Big Brother, doublethink, thought police, thought crime, newspeak, and 2 + 2 = 5. Now that's what I call influential. Number 12. The Odyssey by Homer. No, it's not the yellow guy who works at the nuclear power plant. This is an entirely different Homer, who arguably had even more influence than his animated namesake. The Odyssey is one of 2 major ancient Greek epic poems attributed to the writer Homer. It's one of the oldest extant works of literature still widely read by modern audiences. As with his other great works, the Iliad, the poem is divided into 24 books. It follows the Greek hero Odysseus, king of Ithaca, and his journey home after the Trojan War. After the war, which lasted 10 years, his journey from Troy to Ithaca via Africa and the southern Europe lasted for an additional 10 years, during which time he encountered many perils and all of his crewmates were killed. In his absence, Odysseus was assumed dead, and his wife had to contend with a group of unruly suitors who were competing for Penelope's hand in marriage. The Odyssey was originally composed in Homeric Greek around the 8th or 7th century BC. By the mid-6th century BC, it had become part of the Greek literary canon. In antiquity, Homer's authorship of the poem was not questioned, but contemporary scholarship predominantly assumes that the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed independently and that the stories formed as part of a long oral tradition. Scholars still reflect on the narrative significance of certain groups in the poem, such as women and slaves, who have more prominent role in the epic than in many other works of ancient literature. This focus is especially remarkable when contrasted with the Iliad, which centers on the exploits of soldiers and kings during the Trojan War. The Odyssey is regarded as one of the most significant works of the Western canon, and reimaginings continue to be produced across a wide variety of media. Number 11. 1001 Nights. If you're not a big reader, then you may not have heard of this volume, but if you're a Disney fan, then you're almost certainly familiar with some of it. 1001 Nights is a collection of Middle Eastern folk tales compiled in the Arabic language during the Islamic Golden Age. It is often known in English as the Arabian Nights, from the first English language edition, circa 1706 to 1721, which rendered the title as the Arabian Nights Entertainment. The work was collected over many centuries by various authors, translators, and scholars across West Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, and North Africa, with some tales tracing their roots back to ancient and medieval Arabic, Sanskrit, Persian, and Mesopotamian literature. Most tales, however, were originally folk stories from the Abbasid and Mamluk areas. The stories proceed from an original tale. Some are framed within other tales, while some are self-contained. Some editions contain only a few hundred nights of storytelling, while others include 1001 or more. Some of the stories commonly associated with the Arabian Nights, particularly Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, were not part of the collection of the original Arabic versions, but were instead added to the collection by a French translator. Other stories, such as The 7 Voyages of Sinbad the Sailor, had an independent existence before being added to the collection. A number of stories within the 1001 Nights also feature science fiction elements. One example is The Adventures of Bulukiya, where the protagonist's Bulukiya's quest for the Herb of Immortality leads him to explore the seas, journey to the Garden of Eden, and travel across the cosmos to different worlds, much larger than his own, anticipating elements of galactic science fiction. In another Arabian Nights tale, the protagonist, Abdullah the Fisherman, gains the ability to breathe underwater and discovers an underwater society that's portrayed as an inverted reflection of society on land. Other Arabian Nights tales deal with lost ancient technologies, advanced ancient civilizations that went astray, and catastrophes which overwhelmed them. The City of Brass features a group of travelers on an archaeological expedition across the Sahara to find an ancient lost city. The Ebony Horse features a robot in the form of a flying mechanical horse controlled using keys that could fly into outer space and towards the sun. While the third Kalandar's Tale also features a robot in the form of an uncanny boatman. The City of Brass and the Ebony Horse can be considered early examples of proto-science fiction. Number 10. War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Well, the title says it all. Could anything really be more relevant to our time than those three words? War and Peace is a literary work by Russian author Leo Tolstoy. Set during the Napoleonic War, the work mixes fictional narrative with chapters discussing history and philosophy. An early version was published beginning in 1865, after which the entire book was rewritten and published in 1869. It is regarded with Anna Karenina as one of Tolstoy's finest literary achievements and remains an internationally praised classic of world literature. The book chronicles the French invasion of Russia and its aftermath during the Napoleonic era. It uses 5 interlocking narratives following different Russian aristocratic families to illustrate Napoleon's impact on Tsarist society. The novel spans the period from 1805 to 1820. The era of Catherine the Great was still fresh in the minds of older people. Catherine had made French the language of her royal court. For the next 100 years, it became a social requirement for the Russian nobility to speak French and understand French culture. The historical context of the novel begins with the execution of Louis, Duke of Enghien in 1805, while Russia is ruled by Alexander I during the Napoleonic Wars. Key historical events woven into the novel include the Campaign, the Battle of Austerlitz, and the Congress of Erfurt. Tolstoy also references the Great Comet of 1811 just before the French invasion of Russia. Number 9. Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. 2 more universal topics are woven into the title of this other Russian classic. While Fyodor Dostoevsky has written several works that could be considered some of the most influential ever published, Crime and Punishment is the one that stands above the rest as one of the best books ever written. Crime and Punishment follows the mental anguish and moral dilemmas of Rodion Raskolnikov, an impoverished ex-student in St. Petersburg who plans to kill an unscrupulous pawnbroker, an old woman who stores money and valuable objects in her flat. He theorizes that with the money he could liberate himself from poverty and go on to perform great deeds, and seeks to convince himself that certain crimes are justifiable if they're committed in order to remove obstacles to the higher goals of extraordinary men. Once the deed is done, however, he finds himself racked with confusion, paranoia, and disgust. His theoretical justifications lose all their power as he struggles with guilt and horror and is confronted with both internal and external consequences of his deed. Dostoevsky's use of time shifts of memory and manipulation of temporal sequences begins to approach the later experiments of Henry James, Joseph Conrad, Virginia Woolf, and James Joyce. A late 19th century reader was, however, more accustomed to orderly and linear types of expository narration, so to say that this book was influential to writers that followed would be somewhat of an understatement. Number 8. The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. If you've read this book, then no more really needs to be said. This landmark book is built from the actual diary kept by Anne Frank, the young daughter of a Jewish family hiding during the Nazi takeover in the Netherlands. The innocence of this young girl, so full of hopes and dreams, is held in sharp contrast to the reality of her situation at the hands of the Nazis. This book has become a strong symbol and reminder of the impact of racial persecution. The family was apprehended in 1944, and Anne Frank died of typhus in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in 1945. The diary has since been published in more than 70 languages and received widespread critical and popular attention on the appearance of its English-language translation, Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, in 1952. Its popularity inspired the 1955 play The Diary of Anne Frank, written by the screenwriters Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett, which they adapted for the screen in the 1959 movie version. The diary isn't written in the classic form of Dear Diary or as letters to oneself. Anne calls her diary Kitty, so almost all of the letters are written to Kitty. Anne's already budding literary ambitions were galvanized on March 29, 1944, when she heard a London radio broadcast made by the exiled Dutch Minister for Education calling for the preservation of ordinary documents to create an archive for posterity as testimony to the suffering of civilians during the Nazi occupation. On May 20th, 1944, she notes that she started redrafting her diary with future readers in mind, and the rest is history. Moving on to number 7, Philosophiæ Naturalis Principia Mathematica by Isaac Newton. Written while Cambridge was closed because of the plague, Newton's Philosophiæ Naturalis Principia Mathematica details the principles of gravity, mechanics, calculus, and light and color. In other words, this book set the stage for modern studies of both math and physics. The book, which comprises 3 volumes, was first published in 1867, expounds on Newton's laws of motion, his universal law of gravitation, and is considered one of the most important works in the history of science. In fact, it's been said that it spread the light of mathematics on science, which up to then had remained in the darkness of conjectures and hypotheses, and it's been described as the greatest production of a human mind. This book shows how astronomical observations verify the inverse square law of gravitation, offers estimates of relative masses for the known giant planets and for the Earth and the Sun. It also defines the motion of the Sun relative to the solar system center. It shows how the theory of gravity can account for irregularities in the motion of the Moon, identifies the oblateness of the shape of the Earth, accounts for approximately the marine tides by the gravitational attractions of the Sun and Moon on the Earth's waters, and gives theoretical basis for numerous phenomena about comets and their elongated near-parabolic orbits, and much, much more. So yeah, more than slightly influential. Number 6, The Meaning of Relativity by Albert Einstein. Never heard of this guy? Well, if not, he's just another one of those slightly influential people who managed to explain how the universe works, and this is possibly his most influential work. The Meaning of Relativity, 4 lectures delivered at Princeton University, May 1921, is a book published by Princeton University Press in 1922 that compiles the 1921 Stafford Little Lectures at Princeton University, given by Albert Einstein. The lectures follow a series of 1915 publications by Einstein developing the theory of general relativity. During this time, there were still many controversial issues surrounding the theories, and he was still defending several of his views. The lectures and the subsequent book were Einstein's last attempt to provide a comprehensive overview of his theory of relativity. It's also his only book that provides an overview of the physics and mathematics of general relativity in a comprehensive manner that was accessible to non-specialists. Einstein explained his goal in the preface of the book, in the German edition, by stating that he wanted to summarize the principal thoughts and mathematical methods of relativity theory, and that his principal aim was to let the fundamentals, the entire train of thought of the theory, emerge clearly. On December 27, 1949, the New York Times ran a story titled, "New Einstein Theory Gives a Master Key to the Universe," in reaction to the new appendix in the book's 5th edition, in which Einstein expounded upon his latest unification efforts. Einstein had nothing to do with the article and subsequently refused to speak with any reporters on the matter. He reportedly used the message, "Come back and see me in 20 years," to brush off their inquiries. The book is made of 4 lectures. The first is titled Space and Time in Pre-Relativity Physics. The second lecture is titled The Theory of Special Relativity. The third and fourth lectures cover the general theory of relativity in 2 parts. Einstein did add an appendix to update the book for its 2nd edition, which published in 1945. Now, this appendix was later added for the 5th edition as well in 1955, which discusses the non-symmetric field. Well, the 2nd appendix contains Einstein's attempt at a unified field theory. The result was a work which has entranced and amazed scientists and left non-scientists scratching their heads ever since. Number 5, On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. Another influential work that ambitiously explains the natural world and has been accepted and even hotly debated from the first day of its publication. This work by Darwin laid out the foundation for the theory of evolution. Since its publication, the book's theories and observations have helped make life sciences what they are today. Darwin's adaptation and evolutionary models still aid modern scientists as they build a better understanding of all Earth's species, including our own. Published in 1859, Darwin's book introduced the scientific theory that populations evolve over the course of generations through a process of natural selection, presenting a body of evidence that the diversity of life arose by common descent through a branching of pattern evolution. Darwin included evidence that he had collected on the Beagle expedition in the 1830s and his subsequent findings from research, correspondence, and experimentation. The book was written for non-specialist readers and attracted widespread interest upon its publication. With the development of the modern evolutionary synthesis in the 1930s and 40s, Darwin's concept of evolutionary adaptation through natural selection became central to modern evolutionary theory. Much of the initial reaction was hostile, in large part because very few reviewers actually understood his theory, but Darwin had to be taken seriously as a prominent and respected name in science. Bishop Samuel Wilberforce wrote a review in Quarterly Review in 1860 where he disagreed with Darwin's argument. There was much less controversy than had greeted the 1844 publication Vestiges of Creation, which had been rejected by scientists but had influenced a wide public readership into believing that nature and human society were governed by natural laws. Darwin's book legitimized scientific discussion of evolutionary mechanisms, and the newly coined term Darwinism was used to cover the whole range of evolutionism. By the mid-1870s, evolutionism was triumphant. While Darwin had been somewhat coy about human origins, not identifying any explicit conclusion on the matter in his book, he had dropped enough hints about human-animal ancestry for the inference to be made, and the first review claimed it made a creed of the men from monkeys idea from Vestiges. Human evolution became central to the debate and was strongly argued by Huxley, who featured it in his popular Working Men's Lectures. Darwin did not publish his own views on this until 1871. Number 4. The Interpretation of Dreams by Sigmund Freud. Why do you have so many dreams about your teeth falling out? Why do you keep having that nightmare about drowning? Well, this is the man to ask. The Interpretation of Dreams is an 1899 book by Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, in which the author introduces his theory of the unconscious with respect to dream interpretation and discusses what would later become the theory of Oedipus complex. Dated 1900, the book was first published in an edition of 600 copies, which didn't sell out for about 8 years. The Interpretation of Dreams later gained in popularity, and 7 more editions were published in Freud's lifetime. Dreams, in Freud's view, are formed as the result of 2 mental processes. The first process involves unconscious forces that construct a wish that is expressed by the dream, and the second is a process of censorship that forcibly distorts the expression of the wish. Freud advanced the idea that an analyst can differentiate between the manifest content and the latent content of a dream. Now, the manifest content refers to the remembered narrative that plays out in the dream itself, and the latent content refers to the underlying meaning of the dream. During sleep, the unconscious condenses, displaces, and forms representations of the dream content, the latent content which is often unrecognizable to the individual upon waking. Now, critics have argued that Freud's theory of dreams requires sexual interpretation. Freud, however, always contested this idea. Freud claimed that every dream has a connection point with an experience of the previous day, let's say. Though the connection may be minor, as the dream content can be selected from any part of the dreamer's life. He described 4 possible sources for dreams. A mentally significant experience represented directly. B, several recent and significant experiences combined into a single unity by the dream. C, 1 or more recent and significant experiences which are represented in the context by the mention of a contemporary but indifferent experience. And D, an internal significant experience, such as a memory or train of thought, that's invariably represented in the dream by a mention of a recent but indifferent impression. Now, oftentimes people experience external stimuli, such as an alarm clock or music, being distorted and incorporated into their dreams. Freud explained that this is because the mind is withdrawn from the external world during sleep, and it's unable to give it a correct interpretation. He further explained that our mind wishes to continue sleeping, and therefore will try to suppress external stimuli, weaving the stimuli into the dream to compel a person to wake up or encourage him to overcome it. Freud believed that dreams were picture puzzles, and though they may appear nonsensical and worthless on the surface, through the process of interpretation, they can form a poetical phrase of the greatest beauty and significance. Number 3. The Republic, Plato. Written around 380 BCE, this text is considered to be one of the most influential pieces ever written. The Republic observes justice in man and politics and discusses the role of the philosopher in society. Many of the intellectual concepts contained in the Republic are still discussed today, but the text is also an important historical document that provides historians with a snapshot of Greece at the time of its writing. It is Plato's best-known work, and one of the world's most influential works of philosophy and political theory, both intellectually and historically. In the dialogue, Socrates discusses the meaning of justice, and whether the just man is happier than the unjust woman with various Athenians and foreigners. He considers the natures of existing regimes and then proposes a series of hypothetical cities in comparison, culminating in Callipolis, a utopian city-state ruled by a class of philosopher kings. They also love discussing aging, love, theory of poems, the immortality of the soul, and the role of the philosopher and of poetry in society. Plato's Republic has been influential in literature and art. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World has a dystopian government that bears a resemblance to the form of government described in the Republic. The Orwellian dystopia depicted in the novel 1984 had many characteristics in common with Plato's description of the allegory of the cave, as Winston Smith strives to liberate himself from it, and the film The Matrix also models Plato's allegory of the cave. Number 2. The Quran. The sacred text of Islam, the Quran, is believed to be the last word of God told to Muhammad through the angel Gabriel over a period of 23 years. This book is the cornerstone of the Islamic religion. Believed by Muslims to be a revelation from God, it's organized in 114 chapters, which consist of individual verses. Now, besides its religious significance, it is widely regarded as the finest work in Arabic literature and has significantly influenced the Arabic language. Muslims believe that the Quran was orally revealed by God to the final Islamic prophet Muhammad through the archangel Gabriel incrementally over a period of some 23 years, beginning on the Night of Power when Muhammad was 40 and concluding in 632, the year of his death at age 61 to 62. Muslims regard the Quran as Muhammad's most important miracle, a proof of his prophethood, and the culmination of a series of divine messages starting with those revealed to the first Islamic prophet Adam, including the Islamic holy books of the Torah, Psalms, and Gospel. The Quran is believed by Muslims to be not simply divinely inspired, but the literal words of God, and provides a complete code of conduct that offers guidance in every walk of their life. This divine character attributed to the Quran led Muslim theologians to fiercely debate whether the Quran was either, quote, created or uncreated. According to tradition, several of Muhammad's companions served as scribes, recording these revelations. Now, shortly after the Prophet's death, the Quran was compiled on the order of the first Caliph Abu Bakr by the companions, who had written down or memorized parts of it. Caliph Uthman established a standard version, now known as the Uthmanic Codex, which is generally considered the archetype of the Quran we know today. There are, however, variant readings with mostly minor differences in meaning. Controversy over the Quran's content integrity has rarely become an issue among Muslim history, despite some hadiths stating that the textual integrity of the Quran was not preserved. Well, the Quran describes itself as a book of guidance for humankind, sometimes offers detailed accounts on specific historical events, and often emphasizes the moral significance of an event over its narrative sequence. Number 1. The Bible. This sacred text brought Christianity to the world and has continued to serve as a source of inspiration for millions of people. It is the most translated and the most frequently purchased book in the world. A collection of religious texts or scriptures, some, all, or a variant of which are held to be sacred in Christianity, Judaism, Samaritanism, Islam, and many other Abrahamic religions. The Bible is an anthology, a compilation of texts and a variety of forms, originally written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Believers in the Bible generally consider it to be a product of divine inspiration, but the way they understand what that means and interpret the text varies. The religious texts were compiled by different religious communities into various official collections. The earliest contained the first 5 books of the Bible, called the Torah in Hebrew and the Pentateuch in Greek. The second oldest part was a collection of narrative histories and prophecies. The third collection contains Psalms, Proverbs, and narrative histories. Tanakh is an alternate term for the Hebrew Bible composed of the first letters of those 3 parts of the Hebrew Scriptures. The Torah means teaching, the Nevi'im, prophets, and the Ketuvim, or the writings. Christianity began as an outgrowth of the Second Temple Judaism. The early church continued the Jewish tradition of writing and incorporating what it saw as inspired, authoritative religious books. The Gospels and other texts quickly coalesced into the New Testament. With an estimated total sales of over 5 billion copies, the Bible is the best-selling publication of all time. It had a profound influence on both Western culture and history, and on cultures around the world. The study of it through biblical criticism has indirectly impacted culture and history as well. The Bible is currently translated or is being translated into about half of the world's languages. Thanks for watching, everyone. Did I miss your favorite book? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.